Welcome to How to Run Profitable Retreats podcast, the podcast that guides you not to only host retreats that thrive financially, but also transform people's lives. I'm your host, Leni Cavazos, and each week I bring you the best strategies and personal insights to help you create retreat experiences that transform lives, both your clients and your own. In our journey together, we'll dive into the secrets behind successful retreats, from crafting a unique atmosphere to mastering the logistics that ensure profitability. Whether you're tuning in for inspiring interviews with leading retreat experts or seeking actionable advice in our solo episodes, this podcast is your go-to resource for turning your retreat visions into reality. Don't miss out on any of our episodes and subscribe now. For more tools and a free guide on creating your own six-figure retreat business, visit theretreatplanner.com. Now let's get started and make your retreat dreams come true.
Hello, welcome today to another episode of our podcast on how to run profitable retreats. And I'm so excited to have today Megan Holly with me. She's an amazing photographer, and I am going to tell you a little bit about her before we go into this topic of what you need to ask a photographer when you're planning a retreat. So many of us believe that the photographer already knows exactly what they need to shoot when it comes to a retreat, but the reality is that your perspective and their perspective might be completely different. And for you to ensure that your investment in a photographer is really coming from the other side, is so important to really know what to ask for, right? We always it's a very common assumption. So if you've done this, don't feel bad about it, right? But so today we have Holly, so who is really this artist of the Little Powerhouse branding, and she helps women create businesses that have impact and growth, all while finding ease and confidence within themselves. So she helps women create standout photography and visuals that stop the scroll and gaze engagement. So ultimately bringing your ideal client. Oh, sorry for that. Yeah. So your ideal client closer to the conversion. So she really mentors people through this process of branding and helps them create this branding of their own, right? So she really is about planning the bigger picture of the growth, and with an emphasis of finding yourself with time and freedom and everything, right? So she does from headshot to branding, strategy, mentorships. And then she also does retreat photography, and I've seen her pictures and they're stunning. It's absolutely amazing. So I'm so honored, and it's such a pleasure to have you here today for this episode.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Leni. I'm excited to be here, and I love helping just chat about this. I'm very passionate about helping people create, kind of the retreats of their dreams. So I'm just excited to be here.
Awesome. So yes, as I mentioned in the beginning, I think this is an important conversation. So if you can start it with this, like really, if you are photo shooting a retreat, what would you expect a client to give you, to provide you with, right? Like what is the guidance? And then from there, we can go into like all this fun stuff.
Yeah, so that's a great question, because as much as I would like to say that I'm a mind reader, right? Most photographers like to have a little bit of communication with the retreat facilitators, because, right, we want to make sure that we're giving them what they're looking for. What's the most important parts that they want to highlight? Are there things that they don't want cameras around for? It's hard to know that going in, because every retreat is a little bit different, right? And everybody has kind of a different viewpoint on what it is that's important to them. And so although many of us who do them, especially if we have done multiple, you start to get a little bit intuitive, it's still very helpful. So what is really great to have beforehand is kind of a scope of what the retreat is about, of course, the type of attendees that will be there, and then some shot list ideas. If you've got something very specific that you want to have, for instance, maybe you have an idea for marketing for the future, for what you would want to use, and you want to make sure that you have, shots that are more wide or pulled back for hero banners or things like that. Just having a conversation and some checkpoints to start that off, you will probably get, you will get more than your shot lists, right? But that's just a really great standing point, and something that helps at least have the minimum of what you really are hoping to get out of your photography.
Yes. I think it's so important. Like, really, you are talking about something that is very, very key, because it is like such a key container, right? And I'm really like finding all these amazing
Mhm.
words for it. But yes, you're gonna get so much more than what you ask for. Sometimes we get stressed. And when I used to plan all these massive events, at the beginning, I was like, if I give this very specific shot list, then it means they won't shot the rest. And it's not like that, but these are the shots that you want to make sure that you have, right? And having an
Right.
idea on the itinerary, on the experiences, on what's happening, it's so important, because actually it changes everything, right? There's so many retreats nowadays that they actually include nudity, right?
Yeah.
So because they
Yeah.
are having this, it's something that you probably don't want to shoot, because if
Right.
you want them to be vulnerable, right, and be able to show
Yes.
up as who they are,
Yes.
why,
Absolutely.
right? Why would you shut that and have a lens in front of them? It won't help.
Exactly. And in my experience, the retreats that I have done all have had some portion that are more vulnerable, right? Whether it's nudity or it is very deep conversations and things like that. It's just one of those things where you want people to get what they want out of their experience, and you don't want to take that experience away from them. And you're right, there's a lot of sacredness happening in a lot of retreats. And so knowing when that's going to be and what time, what day or what portion of the retreat to just put your camera away and be a part of it. Most of the time, right, at least for me in my experience, I can say when I'm not having the camera in my hand, I'm kind of a participant, right? I'm there. So that the other thing that does, and something that I do suggest to people if they're new to having a photographer with them, is to have them mesh in, just be a part of the experience as well when they're not having their camera in. Because what I find is too, then in those vulnerable moments, or in the moments that are maybe they're still vulnerable but the camera is out, it's like less intense, let's just say, that the attendees feel a little more comfortable with you. They don't even realize that you're walking away, that you're over doing some photos and things like that. And at the end of the day, I'll have people say, "Oh my gosh, I almost forgot that you were even taking pictures," because I've kind of like melted back and forth. So finding a photographer that is comfortable kind of being kind of a participant and working is very helpful, because then it kind of adds, at least in my experience, to the overall feeling that the people that are on the retreat as full-blown retreat goers, they feel even more comfortable with you. And I think that for me, that's something that comes natural to me, because I meet people where they are, and I'm very intuitive. But it's very important for anybody out there listening that has either had photographers and maybe it wasn't the best experience, or they want to do it in a different way, or they haven't before. Finding somebody who matches the energy for what you're doing is really important too.
Oh, I totally agree with this. Like, really making sure that the photographer doesn't feel like a stranger coming and shooting on you,
Yes.
right? So many times we would be like, "Oh my gosh, I hired this photographer, and it's like I'm paying big bucks for it," right? Because
Right.
photography is not, it's an art, right? So
Right.
you are supposed to pay for that. And then
Yeah.
also, depending on how much you pay, sometimes it depends on like the quality of the pictures that you get and whatnot. But sometimes we forget, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, I want to get as many pictures as possible because I'm paying this X amount of money." And
Right.
what happens there
Yeah.
is that actually they become a stranger on the shot, on the space,
Right.
rather than having them involved. Let's just think that this is different than if you're photo shooting a concert or a dinner or a wedding, where it's a different experience, right? So it's
Yeah.
always we have to bring this energy of sacredness into everything that is being practiced, and it makes such a huge difference, right?
Yeah, it really does. I mean, the last one I did was last spring, and there was cacao ceremonies, and there's just a lot of things. And even in that was something that forefront, I knew that I wasn't going to be taking photos of the whole time, because it was sacred. So in the beginning, when they were getting cleansed with the sage and things like that, took a few shots of that so they could have those really beautiful moments. And then after that, I was there. I was in the cacao
Yeah.
ceremony, and it was really great. And right, I think people, they forget the ins and outs of it. They want to think, oh, how many shots am I going to get and all this stuff. And of course, people want to know what their budget is looking like, but that's something that if you can, at the beginning stages of planning a retreat, talk to a photographer then instead of adding them on at the end, because then you can make sure you build in the pricing and make sure that it's, all a good fit too. So just on that, like a little side note there is reminding people of that too, because you want to have that quality. You want to have somebody who can feel like they can go into that intimate space, because it is just that. And you want to make sure that, that both sides are getting what they need on all accounts.
Yeah, I think this is so important. And actually, for example, if we really think about it in a way of how can this photo shoot serve us in a bigger way, like how can we just utilize it, not just to give it to the people who attended and they have a nice memory, but also in our business. If we think about it in advance, we're like, how does this fit into my website, right? How does this fit into my social media? How does this fit into I don't know, flyers, if you are printing flyers, whatever. So how about like asking for these pictures, right? Like now everything is so focused on vertical because of like Instagram, but people are forgetting about horizontal, and it's like landscape. It's so important to have landscape pictures, don't you think?
Oh, it's absolutely important. And yes, you are so right. If you go into it thinking, because sometimes people get kind of niched down and they're thinking like, oh, I'll only be able to use these photos for future, business and marketing for these retreats. However, if you're really clever, and this is why I'm passionate about what I do, I'll talk with my clients afterwards and say, do you want to have a post consultation on how you can actually use these for more social media than just marketing the retreat, right? Because maybe you have this beautiful landscape photo of, I don't know, a beach, right? And what if you use that kind of as a hero banner with some graphic over it, or, a beautiful font over it on your website? Like, make it work for you. I always tell people, like, the last thing you want is these beautiful photos to just go in a gallery and only be for the memory. Make them work for you as well, right? Within reason. There's obviously certain shots that aren't going to be the things that you're putting out there as, marketing pieces or assets, of course, right? Because again, there's that sacred piece to it. But of course, think about too, there is that opportunity to have, like you said, the more horizontal pieces, even vertical ones. Can you use them to your advantage to really make sure that you have this beautiful, well-rounded, feeling, this up-leveled look, even in the way that you're presenting your business and your retreats and all of that. So absolutely, I think there is so much versatility that you can get if you open your mind, I think, to the possibilities that can come from it all.
Oh my gosh, I totally agree. And I'm a passionate person when it comes to branding. And you have to have certain different pieces that really come together when it comes to branding. And the images are so important. And yes, we can find thousands of images online that you can download. And I used a bunch. I'm not going to say I don't, because they work. They're great.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to create a whole photo shoot just for one post on social, right? So financially, it makes sense. But if you have a good big gallery of photos throughout time, and you make sure you have pictures that are evergreen, right? And for everyone who's here who doesn't know what evergreen means, it means that they can be used for eternity, right? Like you can use it for so many different things and they go out of time. So an example of a non-evergreen picture is a picture of you with a 2020 hat for New Year's Eve, right? Because no other year you will be able to use this on social, because it has a specific year, unless you're telling a story. When I was in 2020, right? But in general, that's a bad shot, right? Like if you're asking a photographer to get shots of that and that's your whole focus, it's not evergreen.
Absolutely. Right? You hit the nail on the head with that, because there can be so many things. And really to jump into your point of having things that just kind of go the gamut, right? You have things that you can utilize. when you have just those assets sitting there, it just helps you up level what you can do. You can get more creative with the content that you create with it and all of that good stuff. But also in that sense, using stock photos is not bad. People are, oh my gosh, like even as a branding expert and photographer and all these things that I like to work with my clients on and giving them their own assets, right? There's still a time and a place for stock photography. For me, I always tell people it should be like a happy kind of cohesivity where the stock should be used when needed, when you are just looking for something specific that, you just don't have in your arsenal. Or like you said, it's kind of a one-off thing. You might not use it often, but you just need this one type of shot. Great, use a stock photo. But if you want to have that personability and that likability in your brand that sets you apart, of course, you need to have both. You have to have those brand assets that are just yours, that are stand out, that are different, unique, whatever it is.
So I have one more question for you. So if we're talking about when you're choosing what type of photography you recommend when it comes to retreats, and I know we can have a blend and everything, right? But do you think it's better to have close-ups of people or like wider pictures with like more people on the scene? Or, is there something that you're like if you have a wish list of like, these are the best things that you want to make sure you have when you're shooting a retreat?
Yes. So in a perfect world, a little bit of both. I know that doesn't really answer the question because it's like but in a perfect world, you'd have both because again, going into the aftercare, right, of it, and then not maybe knowing how you might utilize those photos, they all have a purpose, right? Because I'm thinking there's a picture that I took at a retreat where it was some women, they had just done like a mud bath. And all their hands were linked together, and the shot was far enough back that you saw like their hands, their arms, and like kind of the essential kind of camaraderie that was happening. And it was far enough back that you saw the details of like the crackled mud and like the grip they had on each other. But then it was like far enough back where you could use it more than just like this up close piece. And you could add, maybe an icon or something at the bottom and it would make sense. But you could also zoom in on that even tighter, right? So in a perfect world, both. So that's why, let's bring it all the way back to the beginning, right? That's why that shot list is important. If you can, our brains are never going to think of every single thing that you ever wanted out of your experience. But if you at least have some really great prompts of what you're needing it for, what's the style that you're looking for, definitely, making sure that that's important. I love a tight knit photo to get emotion and see like if somebody's laughing, and that's the essence. Maybe that's what you want. You want to show people that the retreat is all about joy and uplifting, then those are going to be great. But so yes, I think it's really important, again, going back to anybody who's facilitating retreats and they want to make sure that they have a lovely plethora of things to look at and to have at their disposal, having a little bit of both and being open about that. And then the other thing is too, when you're, aside from personality of photographers, you also want to look at their style, right? Because although most branding photographers, at least in that genre, they have the versatility to edit differently. If you have maybe dark and moody brand, or you have a light and airy brand, they should be aware of that, right? And they can help accommodate that. But you still want to make sure that they either are flexible enough to meet what your needs are, or are just spot on your style straight off the bat, So asking for, galleries that they've done in the past, not even doesn't necessarily have to be retreat, but just their galleries of work that they've done. So you can go, oh, that is in line with what I'm looking for. My brand is vibrant and bright and punchy, and that they are too, then awesome, right? Then that's a good fit for you. If you look and it's all kind of really moody, maybe a lot of grain or something like that, and you're like, ooh, that's the exact opposite of me. You might want to be, it doesn't mean that they can't adapt for you, but you might want to be a little bit more, ask a few more questions, see if they do have the capability to do what you need. Because the last thing you want to do is invest that, like you said, that bigger amount of investment into it. And then you're like, these don't even look like my brand. These don't look like my retreat. They don't look like my messaging. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. You really hit a point that is so important here. I work with many, many photographers, and I can tell all of you, if they have a very, very specific style, it doesn't matter. You give them the perfect brief and you tell them it has to be like all pink and purple. And if they do everything in yellow, they're gonna do everything in yellow. Right?
Yep.
Like if you see that most of their shots are this, they are artists, and we need to understand this, right? We need to take this into consideration. And if they have a very specific style, it's very unlikely that they will change. They might tell you, yes, I can do this, because they want to tell you they can, because they want probably the gig or the trip to Costa Rica or whatever.
Yes, right.
But the reality is that there are photographers that are extremely flexible, and you can see it, and there are photographers who are not flexible. So I think this is very important when you're working like you in something that has like all this branding potential. It's normal for the photographers to be more flexible. So I think this is something very important, because they work with several different brands, and each brand has their own style and their own colors, and this allows them to go into this direction, right? But if you have someone who's very much of an artist photographer, like really, like, you know, if you think about like this National Geographic photos kind of style, if you see someone like that, it's very different, because they have one thing, like, right? You don't want to hire a National Geographic photographer for your retreat, because they're going to come with this huge lens, because they're used to shooting high resolution pictures of faraway animals.
Yes, absolutely.
And you probably don't want that.
Yes.
Like, right.
Well, and that's a really great point that you bring up too, is, you know, if you want to make sure that they've at least have some understanding, right, of what goes into a retreat, even if it's the first time they've photographed a retreat. I'm not saying they can't be newbies to the world, or only, you know, whatever the case is. That's perfectly fine, right? Everybody has to start somewhere. Somebody can't say, oh, I've done 5, you know, just if they have never done it, you know. Right. But that being said, doing, like you said, really artistic work, or maybe portrait work with families and children, doesn't always translate in understanding how to capture things like retreats, or just business in general. So as somebody who came from the world of doing, I kind of started like many photographers doing a little bit of everything, but then started honing in and loving bringing to life business owners and women empowerment and all of that. But it took me some time to really cultivate what that looked like. So just being sure that, hey, if you have somebody you know and love that is a portrait photographer, and you're like, there's no question about it, I want them to be a part of it, you know, I love their personality, I think they're going to be flexible and all of that, but they haven't done it yet, you might just want to have a different kind of conversation with them, so they can try to mold as best possible, if that's who you're set on doing it with. But if and when you can, finding somebody who's at least familiar with what branding and marketing side of photography can do for you, again, so you get, you know, what you're hoping for out of it.
Oh, this is so juicy. I love it, because it's so, everything that you're saying, it's so important. And I love like brand photography. Like for me, it's so important. And I actually get quite a few shots, like every 2 months or something. I have a photo shoot, because I need to make sure that I have all the content. But even sometimes with me giving a brief and knowing exactly what I want, there are things that can be missing, right? And it's so important to, like, I have some shots that are just like for fun, and I know there's no white background, so I know I won't be able to use them for a Facebook banner, for example, or for the cover of this podcast, right? Like it's different. It's more on like the space and the area, and it's more about emotions. It's a different thing, right? But I know when I walk into it, that's what I'm looking for, right? Absolutely. And I know it's not going to have a white background, because I'm in the middle of the mountain, and it's okay,
right? But yes,
having this understanding, it's so important. And also when you're choosing the venue for your retreat, right, and if you're doing the scouting or you arrive a little bit earlier, it's always nice to go and see, oh, this is a nice location for a photo. For me, personal photography, right? And I think I'm just gonna step into this last topic that I think is so important, because so many times when we are thinking about doing a retreat shoot, like we're thinking about the experience and everyone coming, and you know, me teaching, and you know, and then but there's people around, but we forget, like we could have, like, if you're a yoga teacher, you can have just yoga poses of you doing yoga that you can use for so many other things. Or if you're a sound healer, right, like a clear shot where the place is like neat and clean for you, right? And then there is this kind of like space that is kind of curated for you, right? And then you think through about it, and then you're like, okay, so there is my shoot list for everything that I have with other people, with more people, with the attendees, and then there's a shot list just for me.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point to bring up to kind of bring it all home, right? Is that, you know, detail shots, space shots, you know, the outdoor, if it's a beautiful location, right? And you want to get some of that, that those are all really things that can just up the thing. Because like you said, when you're the one running the retreat, you're thinking of 4 million things, right? Of making sure everything is going on time and all of this stuff. And so once you can kind of just set it and forget it and say, okay, I've given at least the kind of the tick marks, if you will, the bullet points of what I'm hoping for, and now I've done enough back and forth. Have a pre-consultation, you know, with the photographer, because they might be able to pull out other things that you wouldn't have thought about too. Right. And so once you do that, then the hopes is that you find somebody that you can go in, and then you're just doing your part of it, and they're able to do what you need. You know, of course, if you need to, you know, check in with something at the end of the day or something for what's coming up tomorrow, that's okay. But for the most part, you want them to feel confident that they're going to go and do what they need. They know when not to have the camera. They know when they should, all the different things. Are you going on an excursion and you can't bring any equipment because, you know, you're going to be zip lining? Okay, well, of course, that we need to be on the same page that that's just not a thing. All the things, right? And so that way you can go in and you can be your best self running the retreat, and you don't have to stress about it. And everybody feels really good, and the attendees are enjoying it. And there's just that cohesive feeling of beautifulness happening.
I love it. So for all the micromanagers listening to us, the way for you to be able to kind of sort of be in control of what's going to be the result, because it's important for you to set the expectations with the photographer, because if not, honestly, sometimes even with shot lists, like you will get something that you're like, I did not ask for this, right? So if you don't even ask for anything, who knows, maybe you're lucky and you get amazing shots because the photographer, they're very on their own and they know what they're doing. And sometimes there's people who need a little bit more guidance. So make sure you have this call beforehand, and you make sure that there is this understanding of the needs, the emotions. I mean, you want to get shot, right? All these kind of like this different things that really change and shift the way things are done, right? So this is so important. And then if you're a micromanager in this way, then once the retreat is happening, you can really release, because you're like, right? And something that I highly recommend is to put inside when you're planning your own schedule. If you want to have a shot of yourself, like a photo shoot, right? Make sure that you allocate this time already, and you're like, during the free time, this is the time where I get a photo shoot taken of me. And then you tell the photographer, at this time, we are going to spend time together, and we are just going to focus on me. Can you please go and find some locations that you really think are amazing for me to have these kind of shots, right? Do I need a white background? Do I need this? And then let them do the scouting of the venue if you want to, you know, or you do the scouting if you really want to make sure that, you know, there's certain places. But book it in advance, right? Plan for it. Plan to have some me time with the photographer.
Absolutely. That is a really great reminder for people that you're at this beautiful space. You're at the, you know, doing this beautiful retreat. You want to make sure that you have some of your own personal branding moments there, you know, to celebrate that and have those assets. And so that's super important. And I think the last thing to remember is when you're going into, like you said, the management thing, also, you know, if you can find a photographer who's open to being just like helpful in other ways too. Like for me, I know one of the retreats I did one time, I was like, I'm here, like, I'm here to serve and help. Like, is there anything else that I can do? And there's just a couple little additional things within like my realm that I could help with and make sure things were kind of tidy in the space that we're gonna do photos. And, you know, don't be afraid to have like open up that relationship to make sure, obviously within reason, like you're not gonna ask them to be the chef all of a sudden. Like that's not gonna be very helpful. But like, can they, you know, help you prepare the space or something like that? Just, you know, don't be afraid to ask for help is what I'm getting at. And most of us will say, oh, sure, what is going to be, you know, because we want obviously the work that we do to be the best possible too. So like allow yourself to just be free of that. You're hiring them for a reason. So utilize that and have that beautiful relationship. And if it's maybe somebody that you work with regularly and have at multiple retreats over time, it'll even get better over time. If you have, you know, maybe 1 or 2 photographers you use regularly, you'll even get more and more in sync with each other as time goes on, which is really beautiful too. So yeah.
I think this is amazing. And I also believe that it's so important that, for example, if we are creating the shot, to ask, there is a question. So when you're doing like high-end shots, you usually would hire a photography stylist, right? And this person is the one who's gonna come and clean up the space and make it look pretty. And honestly, I've seen photo shoots that they had a stylist and you could see the mats and they're not clean. And I'm like, why would you have a stylist, right? Like this is a person who needs to like look at the frame, right? And this is what they do. If you don't know what a photo stylist does, like you look at the frame of the picture and you're like, okay, so this looks good. And the apple is in the perfect position, and you know, all this kind of like little details, like to make sure that the props are nice, and you know that you have the hat in the perfect location, that you know, even like the wind, whatever, it's like all these kind of little details. But when you're having a retreat, honestly, you're not going to have a photographer and a photo stylist. It's not necessary. So make sure that the person who's going to be doing the photography can do this on their own, and they will be able to tell you, hey, can you move this way? Like one of the best photographers that I know for like yoga is someone who actually went and became a yoga teacher, so he could understand the poses, and then he could know how long he could ask the people to stay on the pose. Like so many photographers used to say like, hey, you're doing a headstand, please stay there for 15 minutes while I take all the shots that I need. People cannot stay for 15 minutes on a headstand. Right? So he was like,
they absolutely can't.
Right? And that's how he started. And now he's really a yoga teacher, and he like does photography for fun, but that's like his journey completely shifted, right? But he was a photographer, and like people started asking him like, hey, would you take pictures of me in yoga poses? And then he's like, I don't understand them quite well, so let me become a yoga teacher, right? This is like the kind of like passion that you want to find, someone who really understands what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Absolutely, yes. And so from the styling standpoint, right, you don't want to have all these extra hands on deck, right? From a budget standpoint, from facilitating standpoint, all of that. And so if you can make sure that the photographer feels comfortable in that, like I have an interior design background, and I have a, you know, a very like the last thing I ever want is like cords coming out the back of, you know, the music system, just hanging there and looking sloppy. So if I see that, you bet your bottom dollar, I'm going to go and I'm going to fix that. And I'm going to try to do what I can to make the space look good. So that's another great question to ask. Like, do you feel comfortable adapting the space if need be, or moving, you know, sliding furniture a little bit and over? Are you familiar enough?
Awesome.
Are we good?
Yes.
So yes, you really just want to make sure people like have that ability, right, to adapt the space if they're comfortable doing that. So that again, you don't have to think or worry about all of it. I mean, of course, if you have a little bit of input, that's great, but you want to be able to walk away and do what you need to do. And then the last thing to think about in that too is, even if they aren't a yoga instructor, are they familiar at least with yoga? Like for me, I'm not an instructor, but I've taken hundreds of yoga classes. One of my best friends is, so I'm familiar. Some of the retreats I've done have been yoga. And so I know people aren't going to stay on their head for 15 minutes. And I know angles to get bodies so you can really see the shapes of different poses versus this weird, awkward space that you're like, what is even happening? So again, depending on the type of retreat that you're doing, maybe asking them if they've at least done something in that realm or are familiar enough with it. Obviously there's always going to be something that might be newer to them, but if they're willing to do a little bit of research, whatever it is, right? And so it's very important because, you want to be able to just feel good about the investment in time that you're having.
Yes, it makes total sense. It's like asking a photographer that does landscapes to suddenly know the human form.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
Right? So yes, okay. This is amazing. So if we can recap, like, first of all, make sure you have a shot list, right? Like,
yes.
This is so important, like having a shot list. Make sure you have a call with the photographer before, and then take them through the itinerary and what you really want, and like the emotions and everything that you want to get out of there. Make sure if you want some shots of yourself that you schedule that in advance. And also have the conversation of what it includes when you are hiring them, and see how they can help you in the best way possible, and see how the exchange works, right? Like, do they get to experience the classes as well, and then just take like the camera for a couple of minutes like we mentioned, right? So this is so important, and it's so juicy.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
I think the last little bonus tip I would say is that to make sure that the expectations, especially if they're going to kind of be going back and forth from participating to working, that they kind of know what that looks like for you, because it can be awkward from the photographer standpoint to be like, okay, did I get what I needed? And is it okay to put it down now? And, I've kind of been there where I'm like, okay, I think I've got what we're supposed to do. So just making sure that's really clear on, yes, feel free, like, this is where it's at. Like, the more clear, this is my new statement, clear is kind. And the more clear you are, the better you all can just enjoy it. And the photographer can kind of vacillate between having their camera in hand and then kind of just easing in, and, like we talked about before, being a part of it and making it, a really great experience. So that would be my last bonus tip, is just being really clear on when and how they can kind of jump in and out of that those roles. So yeah.
Oh, this is amazing, Megan. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been amazing. So for all the audience that is listening to us, how can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm in a couple places. You can find me on Instagram, the most. That's kind of where I hang out. And my handle there is Megan Holly Creates. So you can find me there. I'm always chatting on stories. I've got lots of great, fun, educational, inspirational content there. I'm also on Facebook. Handle is also the same, Megan Holly Creates. And I love connecting with other fellow, just heart-centered, beautiful humans and people who are out there doing retreats and running their own businesses and all of that goodness. So anybody who wants to just stop and say hello, I'm always there to meet a new face. So thank you so much for having me.
No, this was such a pleasure. And thank you for everyone who's listening. I hope you really found this episode very useful, because having photography during your retreats and your business, it doesn't matter if it's not retreats at all, it's so important. So make sure you make this a priority, and you bring a budget into your business for photography, right? Absolutely. So if you can take something out of this, is like, really make sure there is a budget for photography and for these assets to be created, because it's like people say you eat with your eyes. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to things. People these days don't read too much, and then they are captured by the image. So make sure there is a budget, and it's not just like your phone photos, even though they have amazing cameras now and you could have ones, but like selfies, not the best marketing material, right? So thank you so much for joining. This was absolutely juicy. Goodness. I loved it. And I will see you guys next time on our next episode. Bye.
Wow, what a great episode. If you like our podcast, How to Run Profitable Retreats, leave us a review and share it with a friend.